diversifying the police department, anti-bias training, those sort of reforms, then we'll see the outcomes. But we really need to dig even deeper into it. And what we're seeing is a groundswell of demands for the city of Minneapolis to defund the police. That's what we're seeing right now. These folks are the ones who are transformation oriented. And so in Minneapolis, the public and political will right now are very concentrated at this point in transformational change. And things have also changed in that who is in elected office here. I'm actually not the only Black trans person on Minneapolis City Council. A lot of folks don't realize that. My sister, Council Vice President Andrea Jenkins, is also on the Minneapolis City Council. And she's a powerhouse. Activists and organizers have allies with the same vision for equity and justice who are in office now. So that really opens the possibility when we all work together. So I would say that we're starting to dive into it. The state's Minnesota Department of Human Rights has opened an investigation into the police department for the last 10 years for systemic racial discrimination. So I would say what we need right now is for folks outside of Minneapolis to keep an eye on what's going on, and also to invest in the folks, the organizations who are on the ground, who've been doing this work for years and years, and to also push folks on the ground here, communities, to make their voices heard. That is one of the biggest things, is that I hear the most from the folks who just simply want more police. I have been labeled soft on crime because of the fact that I advocate for a comprehensive approach to public safety. So we need folks who believe in transformational change and what community safety can look like and how to get there. We need for folks' voices to be heard.
We've already begun to see the seeds of so much of that transformation right there in your hometown due to leadership of yours and so many others. We saw the first Black woman student body president at the University of Minnesota get them to stop contracting with the police force there. We saw that the public schools there followed suit. And from former teacher to former teacher, I'm always like, yes, it's about time that we actually make schools safe for all young people. And that doesn't need to include police. So thank you so much, not just for this conversation, but for your continued courage and action in the role that you're playing. I'm going to come lastly to my good friend and partner in this work, Rashad Robinson, who is the president of Color of Change. Rashad, we've been on the phone a lot in the last few weeks. And you are always thinking so critically about how we ensure that the local conversations that Councilman Cunningham just talked about are really upheld at the national level, and that everyone is doing their part. As I always say, we don't have saviors, we build teams, and that's how we get the work done in community. And that's exactly the work that Color of Change does. It gives all of us an opportunity to be on the team. So how are you thinking about making sure that people understand what their role is on the team? What are the spectrum of demands that you are seeing coming from your members at Color of Change and that you all are exploring and pushing as you do this work?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you, Bernie, for that question. Thank you, President Obama and Attorney General Holder. And it's actually great to be on this conversation and to be back doing work with my brother's keeper. What I will say is a couple of things. You know, over the last 8 months, just alone, over 5 million people have taken action with Color of Change, raising their voices online, signing petitions, making phone calls, showing up to rallies. And that's important, right? Because what we want to be able to do is translate the presence of this moment into the ability to actually change the rules. And sometimes those are the written rules of policy, and other times those are the unwritten rules of culture. And I want to talk about both, about why both of those things are critically important in this moment, and why we have to channel strategic action to actually get things done. No individual alone is going to work to change systemic racism in all the ways that it impacts our society. Racism is like water pouring over a floor with holes in it. It will find the cracks. And so we constantly need to figure out how are we shoring up the systems that will have cracks in them and building new systems for the future. And so on the written rule side, we are very much focused on how do you give people in that moment something clear to do, pushing for justice when justice needs to be served, but recognizing that we've got to move people up a ladder of engagement, because none of the families simply want justice for their own family. They recognize that the long-term rules need to change. And when it comes to policing, there is so much that happens at the local level that we have to pay attention to. The other speakers talked about it. And so we need to be focusing that energy on local policy, pushing to change local practice, and the difference between policy and practices. Sometimes we change the laws, but we also have to change the people who implement those laws. And then we think about the work at the federal level. And we've got to change all of the ways in which money from the federal level incentivizes and disincentivizes certain types of action. And part of what we try to do at Color of Change is point people at those strategic things to do, building sort of the energy and helping to describe for people how to do it. You know, a couple of years ago, in the height of the work to challenge police violence, we came up against district attorneys and state's attorneys that we simply did not have the ability to move. We would show up, it didn't matter if we had 10 petitions or 10,000 petitions or 100,000 petitions. They were not nervous about disappointing our community. And so we recognized we had to help the community better understand the role of district attorneys. We had to build more energy because district attorneys could operate without public pressure. These are executive level positions that can have a large amount, the sort of most powerful actors in the criminal justice space. So we built the only searchable national database of prosecutors in the country called winningjustice.org. We worked with folks in Hollywood like Common to develop an animated video that describes the role of district attorneys for everyday people so people can understand how district attorneys operate. We worked across the movement to get folks from big organizations to local grassroots organizations aligned around 6 clear demands that we could take to get people talking about treating kids as kids, reducing and ending the use of money bail, increasing transparency. All of these things are critically important to sort of winning justice long term. Right? We have to change the role of prosecutors, and we have to change what the public expects from prosecutors. We have to change the way that the public thinks about criminal justice. And that kind of leads me to the cultural conversation. Because for the last 20 years, basically, kind of with a couple of blips here and there, violent crime has steadily went down in our country. But according to Pew and everyone else, Americans think that violent crime is going up. And so we have a deep gap between perception and reality. And that makes it much harder when we are trying to do those critical things that the councilman talked about in terms of reducing police budgets, in terms of actually ensuring that we're investing in education and mental health and jobs and all the things that we know that communities that have reduced the need for law enforcement, they don't need as many police. And so because the public has been inundated with images that makes us believe that violent crime is right around the window, right around the door, we've had to build a program. And through our work at changehollywood.org, through our efforts, we worked with USC to do a whole study of crime TV shows. And now we're working in writers' rooms to push and change the content and the storytelling. So one of the things that we looked at was all of these crime TV shows that are covered in cities like Chicago and New York, very diverse on air. And then you look at the writers' rooms, and all the writers' rooms are all white, folks with no sort of connection to the community, no skin in the game on sort of the impact of the images that they're portraying, constantly putting sort of black faces on the criminal justice system, a sort of magical world where black and brown people exist, but racism doesn't. And we have to really work to sort of change that. And part of that activism is the work that we have to do, because if we're going to get to the place where the narrative changes enough for us to achieve the type of policy changes that are needed, we have to change the story. And I want to say that far too often we tell a story about Black communities being vulnerable. And we'll say things like Black communities are vulnerable when Black communities have been under attack. Black communities have been targeted. Black communities have had a history of being fleeced, of being underinvested. And all of those things are not about being vulnerable. Those are things about being on the chopping block. And so when we work to change that story, we can accomplish so much more.
I have one very brief question for you because I know we have to wrap up now. People keep asking me this question, so I want to ask you, and maybe you can give me some tips. Is this moment a game changer? We've been in this work for a while now. Many people have been in it for even longer than us. But is this moment a seismic shift in what's possible where we see ourselves right now?
You know, I think it's a great question because I think that we want fast food. We want things that are quick and we want things that are easy. And progress and justice is not easy, right? The thing about inflection points is that they present the possibility for huge leaps forward, or they actually present the real threat for us to go backwards. And I think what we all have to recognize is that a lot of things actually have changed over the last several years. White people in a Starbucks take out their cell phone and are filming a police interaction that they don't actually, that they recognize is wrong because a movement has built the sort of mental model to train them. A major financial company, when they create consequences for an employee that does something racist in a park, uses the word racism in their statement in a way that we probably wouldn't have imagined them doing. That doesn't mean we give institutions too much credit, but we recognize what we have won along the way and the way in which we have shifted what our demands can be. We've shifted what can be possible. And so I want folks to think that we have been the game changer. The game has continued to change. And the deep level of pushback that we can continue to get from forces is an absolute result of the power that our movement is building. Make no mistake, it doesn't mean that progress is a straight line. But I want folks who are coming into this movement to not come into this movement thinking that they've got to fix a movement, but that they've got to put on their armor and join us. They've got to follow the institutions that have been driving and making so much change, and then they've got to add their creativity and their interest to what we are doing. But we have been winning, and so much of the reaction to what we are seeing is a result of the progress that I believe we are making.
Precisely. The pushback wouldn't be so great if the progress wasn't real. We are the game changer. Rashad, thank you so much. We've heard in this conversation that social change work, changing our communities, having the kind of world we deserve, it's hard work, but it is absolutely necessary work. And we have to be brave enough to imagine what is possible and then go work for it and not just dream it. And we also have to be incisive enough to make sure that people are safe and whole and healthy now. Look, Black people deserve to live because we are human. And Black people deserve much more from America for lots of reasons, but in part because we often save it from itself. We know for sure that we don't just deserve to survive, we deserve to thrive. That means we need justice. And as Dr. Cornel West says, justice is what love looks like in public. So let's go make sure that love is living out loud in public. Mr. President, I see your face. I've seen that face many times before in our meetings. I know you are itching to ask a question. So I will close and hand it off to you.
Well, listen, I've just been enjoying hearing all the wisdom that's been spread by so many others. I want to first of all give Eric Holder his props. As Attorney General, he rebuilt a civil rights division within the Justice Department and was consistently on the ground, working with communities, listening to communities, and coming up with practical solutions to try to make things better. And I couldn't be prouder of him. Blown away by Philippe and all the good work that he's doing. Rashad has been a consistent warrior for change. He was part of the conversations we had after Ferguson. And Brittany, I think you're all that. So as I listen, I am feeling once again inspired. And what has particularly inspired me is the degree to which folks are thinking strategically, practically, at a very detailed level about where are the places where you can make change and what are the practical solutions backed up by research, backed up by data, backed up by experience that allows us to create a set of communities that are safe and just, safe and fair, safe and non-discriminatory, and that is possible. And I think that one of the things that has been raised is the fact that we don't have the capacity to eradicate 400 years of racism in one fell swoop. So if we think that this is a seismic shift, I hope people don't feel like, well, nothing's going to happen once we figure this out. As I've been known to quote Dr. King, I've said frequently, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. We bend it. All of you have bent it over the last 4, 5, 6, 10 years. And we are seeing the fruits of those labors in the degree of awareness that is out there. Look, think about some of the people who have unequivocally spoken out against what happened in Minneapolis. I mean, you have, I just saw Jim Harbaugh, sorry, I know we got, the Ohio State contingent here, but you got Jim Harbaugh, the coach of Michigan football, marching today. That's not something that was happening 5, 6 years ago, although Jim I know, and he's been on the right side of this issue for quite some time. You have unlikely participants because all of you have worked so hard to raise awareness. That's the progress that has been made. It doesn't mean everything's been solved. The only question I think maybe might be worthwhile for me to throw out there, even though I've read enough of the literature to have a pretty good sense of what the answer is going to be. Brittany, you mentioned that Campaign Zero has put forward 8 Can't Wait. We've talked about the 21st Century Task Force report. It'd be useful maybe to just tick off very quickly. What are the 8 things that are the 8 that Campaign Zero is promoting? Because for a lot of people who are watching, they may be surprised that some of these things are practical and could be implemented quickly. I know just one off the top of my head that I know we can all focus on because it's been so painfully real these last few weeks. Chokeholds and strangleholds. Just saying that's not what we do. You don't need that in order to effectively restrain someone. So give me what are the 8 in executive summary form so people can hear what these specific things are.
Got you. So I didn't know the first question would come to me, but the 8 things are banning chokeholds and strangleholds, requiring de-escalation first, requiring a warning before pulling out a weapon, exhausting all alternatives for those actions, a duty of other officers to intervene. So officers can just stand there and watch injustice happen, banning shooting at moving vehicles. We know that keeps peace and everyday citizens safe, establishing a use of force continuum, and requiring all force to be reported. And I want to be really clear. Together, those 8 things can reduce police violence by upward of 70%. That does not stand in competition with what Philippe just walked us through. Because we know that these things can happen immediately without any executive order or act of Congress, all we need is a mayor to have the political will and courage to stand and say, those 8 can't wait, and I will go and change the use of force standard tonight, let alone tomorrow. So do that now, and then continue to work with your community, because we will continue to keep up the pressure. I can promise you that, to make sure that we are getting to those comprehensive public safety solutions that are community-based and community-oriented and far beyond anything that we're experiencing right now that Philippe just walked us through. These don't stand in competition with imagination. These are a necessary step immediately to keep people safe as we do the hard work of making sure we get what's.
That's great. And let me just point out, in my opening remarks, I mentioned sometimes this tension is posed between political participation and protest. Philippe's an example of why you have to participate politically, because if you are on the streets protesting and making demands, having somebody on the city council who can follow up and respond and advocate and deal with pushback and is in the room when budgets are made and is advising mayors on how they're going to negotiate the next collective bargaining contract with the police union. You need those folks in order to ultimately deliver the goods. I'm constantly mindful of the fact that this is not an either or thing, and there's so many ways, all of which are necessary to make a difference. When Rashad talked about the cultural element of this, Dr. King, this may be apocryphal, but I think somebody mentioned to him, just having an anti-discrimination bill, an anti-lynching bill, that's not going to change hearts and minds. He says, no, it won't, but it'll maybe stop me from getting lynched. And that's important too. So laws are important. On the other hand, the narrative and the stories and telling people, here, see me, I'm human, here's my pain. This is somebody's son, this is somebody's uncle. Here's the story that you need to understand about our background and our community. How do we break down stereotypes, as Eric Holder eloquently talked about? That's the work of a lot of people. So some are going to be on the streets protesting. Some are going to be running for office. Some are going to be writing. During this week, I picked up and reread The Fire Next Time. It is frightening to notice how James Baldwin can lay out a reality 50 years ago that sounds like it was written yesterday. And that's activism, that's work, that's participation. So I worry sometimes that, as we debate strategies, people start thinking there's one way of doing things. We all have a role to play, we all have a part. The more specific we are, practical, in the short term, as well as visionary in the long term, the better off we're going to be. But with that, I'm going to be quiet because you don't need to hear from more old head stuff. But I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you. And Michael, I'm assuming that the conversation is going to continue.
Yes, sir. Let me go ahead and jump in and thank Brittany for the masterful moderation and for all the wisdom and hard work that was on display. I'm now going to turn it over to our Deputy Director for Network and Partnerships at My Brothers Keeper Alliance, Nicole Fields, who's going to take a couple questions from our MBK communities. So not everyone watching has an opportunity to ask questions, but our MBK communities do. So that's another reason you should become an MBK community. So Nicole is going to pose a couple questions, but we will get you out of here by 6:30, everyone. We realize that we've been on for a while, but we will be sending resources afterwards. We've also created a Google group so we can continue this conversation there as well. So Nicole, let me bring you on to field those questions.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, President Obama. Really powerful conversation. Tons of great questions. As Michael mentioned, we can continue this conversation. So if we don't get to your question, do not worry. We can continue this conversation in our Google group. I'm going to take the first question from our young people. Playon Patrick asks, this question is directed at Councilman Cunningham. How have the media's portrayal of frequent violent riots in Minneapolis affected your efforts to promote the work of protesters, activists, and elected officials pushing towards a self-sustaining public safety system?
Yes, thank you for that question, Platon. Playon, excuse me. So the media's portrayal of hyper-focusing on the violent protest or the violence and the rioting happening during the protest really pulls away from what is actually happening. The real story of the trauma and the pain and the reason why folks are out on the ground doing the work, why we are traumatized as a community, why we are doing this work together. So the media is looking for a sensational story, and talking about the public health approach to public safety is not that sexy. So it's easier to be able to pick what's happening right now, make that newsworthy. And so what it does is it's distracting. It's distracting from the voice of the folks who are on the community, who have demands, who have a clear vision. It's distracting, it's pulling away from their voice and centering them. The folks who have been on the ground nonstop for years, some folks in their cases for decades. And so I want to make sure that I've been all over the media. I've been fortunate that folks have been reaching out all over the world, and I keep hammering home. Everybody wants to talk about the riots and, the violence and everything that's happening, but I always redirect it back to it is possible for us to build alternative systems to public safety outside of policing. It requires political will, it requires investment, and we are already doing it and it works. And so trying to constantly bring it back to that is really what I think it's important, that we have messengers who have the platforms, the bully pulpits, as we say in politics, have those platforms to be able to speak that. We have to keep pushing it and not let media distract us from really the point, which is justice.
Thank you, Councilmember. Great, well said. The next question actually was asked, a few folks asked this same exact question, and I think any one of our panelists can take this. What advice can you give to mayors to honor protesters' demands for more police accountability and less brutal and racist practices while supporting their police force and maintaining broad public confidence? Folks have been asking, how do we change these accountability measures while also confronting police unions who have invested in our elected officials?
I'm going to take a stab at something just because I think it's illustrative. It doesn't answer the entire question. When I was in the state legislature back in Illinois, we passed one of the first, if not the first, laws dealing with racial profiling in traffic stops. And there was no way to get that passed without support of the FOP, the Fraternal Order of Police, the primary organization of the police unions. And the argument I was able to make to them was that police officers are going to be safer if there is greater trust and less tension. That they will be able to do their jobs better if they have data that has been collected, that is clear, and police chiefs are going to be able to manage their forces more effectively. They will be less distracted by things that don't require an armed response, and they can refocus attention in ways that are good for them as well as the community. And it took a long time to make that argument, and I'm sure that there are rank and file members who didn't believe it. But in fact, after we passed it, we started being able to collect data on that issue. And we were able to get them to go along. Now, how responsive the police union is going to be in any circumstance, it's going to go city by city. And it's not easy. But I guess the point I am making, and Eric Holder, if he's still on, may want to chime in on this. I do think there is police leadership that recognizes the need for change. But changing culture is hard. And sometimes the dynamics within the unions themselves are different. And, and sometimes there's that sense of we need to close ranks even though we know some things are messed up. And so finding ways to listen and recognize that they have a tough job, but also then insist that this is what we need to do. We're going to do it. We'll work with you to figure out how to do it. So when Brittany talked about the 8 can't wait, you should have a dialogue to find out what specific things are a problem with not having to choke somebody, particularly when they're already in handcuffs. What is it that you think is a problem? When you force people to articulate what it is that they object to with reasonable demands of the sort that have been outlined, a lot of times they come up empty. But you have to engage in that conversation. And I think that it's possible to get that done. At the end of the day, though, if you don't have the political pressure to do it, they will resist. Just because the status quo always resists without some pressure. And that's why it's so important, both for the protest and for the follow-up that people like Councilman Cunningham could apply.
Great. Thank you, President Obama. Next question. I'm going to take 2 more. This question is coming from Dr. Jim Bostic in Yonkers, New York. First, he thanks our panelists and says his question is, how do we effectively integrate the generational differences in age and history often see develop between our younger generation and those of us who have been in this fight for many decades in such a way that we respect each other's ideas and approaches to dealing with institutional racism in our respective communities and not diminish the role and the will of either?
So I'm going to say I'm going to have to call it here. This will have to be the last question, and I'm going to ask one of our panelists to take that and try to give us a 90-second response. While you're thinking of your response, I just want to say how grateful we are for Dr. Jim Bostic. Yonkers is one of our MBK impact communities that is doing extraordinary work on the ground in Yonkers and in the prison system in Yonkers as well. So who'd like to take that question with a quick response?
Well, I'd say this, there is the need for young people to work with people like myself who have some years behind them. And the arrogance of youth cannot be the determinant. The arrogance of age can't be a determinant. There is wisdom through lived experience. There's idealism that young people possess in abundance. And it's the combination of that idealism with that experience that I think makes the most effective movements. People who are older have to understand that young people have always been at the forefront of positive change in this nation. I mean, the founding fathers were really young people. The oldest Federalist was George Washington. He was only 44 years old. Richard Pryor used to say that you don't see many old fools. And so I think young people need to understand that as well. You don't get to be 60, 70, 80 years old without having navigated a whole series of things that's worthwhile. And you have things as a young person you might want to test, theories you want to try. Older people can say, well, I've experienced this and this is why this theory is not going to work. So it's a combination of the two and a lack of arrogance on the part of both that ultimately can create a coalition that can be successful.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Mr. President, before we wrap up, any final words?
No, just keep working and stay hopeful. As I said, this is a moment, and we've had moments like this before where people are paying attention. And that doesn't mean that everything will get solved. And so don't get disheartened because there's a marathon, not a sprint. But the fact that people are paying attention provides an opportunity to educate, activate, mobilize, and act. And I hope that we are able to seize this moment. I hope the mayors across the country who have either been watching or hear about this, take that pledge to start immediately implementing some steps that can make a difference. And I hope all the young people who've been inspired and engaged and involved, they keep at it because that's what ultimately is going to create the kind of country we want. And for those who have been talking about protests, just remember, this country was founded on protest. It is called the American Revolution. And every step of progress in this country, every expansion of freedom, every expression of our deepest ideals has been won through efforts that made the status quo uncomfortable. And we should all be thankful for folks who are willing in a peaceful, disciplined way to be out there making a difference. So thank you so much, everybody. Proud of you.
Thank you, Mr. President. I encourage all of you to go to Obama.org. Go to Obama.org if you're a mayor, take the pledge. If you're looking to become an MBK community, if you're looking for places to donate or resources, or just to join the Alliance, go to Obama.org. We will continue to be there for you, with you. Our partners at the Leadership Conference Mayors are excited to provide technical assistance for you as you think about reading those use of force policies, as well as our broader partner network. So this is just the beginning of a conversation. We'll continue this in many different ways, and also be on the lookout for our next town hall that will be coming up, as well as some other actions. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you, Councilman Cunningham. Thank you, Brittany. Thank you, Rashad Robinson. Thank you to all of our MBK communities for the extraordinary work you do every day on behalf of our boys and young men of color and our sisters. And thank you to all of our young men and all of our young women for everything that you do, not just to be the future, but to be the change today. Have a great day, everybody.